Going to Glen Marcotte. Glen is a longtime friend of Seniors Action Quebec. He served on one of our first board of directors. He is a semi-retired social worker from the CLSC Guy Metro, and he was in the home care department. He's also a member of Elder-Aide Associates, which he administers psychosocial assessments for the homologation, oh my God, of mandates of incapacity. So you know that sometimes the CLSC social workers will ask for an assessment and they want to know how much you're able to do on your own. Can you stay in your place on your own? Well, Glen does assessments. He's a graduate of the University of Calgary and McGill. He volunteers with several based organizations that provide support and advocacy to elders. And we are very lucky. He has done this for us on multiple occasions, and he's always very well received. So without further ado, Glen, I turn it over to you.
I've been a volunteer with Revenue Canada and Revenue Quebec since 2007. So I started it before my retirement. I also had done a bit of it in Calgary as well in the mid-'80s. So I hope that by the end of the workshop this morning, you'll be able to maximize your income tax return for 2019. If you find that there are elements here that you didn't know about and that you would like to claim for the previous years, you can always ask for an amendment. That's not a problem. You're entitled to it for up to 10 years. With certain exceptions, you're entitled to 10 years in the back. So the first thing that we think of when we think of elders, of course, is age. So anyone over 65 or over is entitled to what's called an age exemption. Before I go into the exemption, I need you to look at this sheet that I handed out during the break. And you see that the first sheet is divided into non-refundable credits and refundable credits. Now, like with any bureaucracy, the language is used to serve Revenue Quebec, Revenue Canada. So it means diddly squat to us. So let me clarify what a non-refundable credit is and what a refundable credit is. A refundable credit means that when you ask for this, you're going to get it back. So consider it like cash in your pocket. So what they'll do is they'll give you this money because of the various conditions that are written in the bottom of the page. The top of the page are for non-refundable credits, and all a non-refundable credit does is that if and only if you're going to be paying income tax or any other amount as a result of filing your income tax form, be it Quebec or be it Canada, if you're supposed to be paying something, well, that non-refundable credit will reduce what you're supposed to pay. So that's basically what it is. So let's get back to age. Now, the age non-refundable credit applies to both Revenue Quebec and Revenue Canada. You'll see that there's a big discrepancy. The Canadian one is about twice the Quebec one. Now, the reason for that is because in the province of Quebec, we're by far the province that has the greatest number of social programs. We're much more socially democratic than a lot of other places. For that reason, our programs can be quite generous, and consequently, when you compare the credits that Quebec offer, it's always on top of the programs that are already there. So they reduce what the credit is. So that's why the federal credit is $7,000 for your age, and the maximum for Quebec is about $3,000. Now that applies up to a certain income level. Remember, as a volunteer, what I do is I deal primarily with individuals that have low income. And the volunteer program at Revenue Canada and Revenue Quebec is based on doing the income tax forms free of charge if your income is under $25,000 a year. So that's really the focus of the population that we work with. Having said that, this person that earns less than $25,000 a year in income is given the full $7,000 credit. Now, what that means is that if you had to pay income tax half of this, approximately a quarter of this, is refundable. You'll get it back when it's applied against the income tax that you would be paying. So let's go back to the second one, living alone. Now, Quebec gives you credit if you live alone, but it's not refundable. It's only deducted from any income tax that you would normally be paying. Canada doesn't do it at all. Okay. Medical expenses. There is a limit of $2,302 in the federal government of a non-refundable tax credit for your medical expenses. You can't go any higher than that. And in Quebec, I can't see any. I've looked over the forms and I don't think that there is really a maximum. One thing that probably you're very interested about is what is a caregiver amount. Now, the caregiver amount is a way to reward the caregiver that is caring for you or an elder. And it depends on the level of autonomy of the elder. If the person is quite autonomous, then the ceiling will be $21.86 per year that caregiver will receive off his income tax, only off his income tax. So you'll see caregiver amount is in the top portion. It's not refundable. So if that caregiver is working elsewhere, well, by caring for an elder, his income tax will be reduced by the $21.86. Now if you go to the bottom, let's go to the bottom here for the caregiver amount on the refundable. It is refundable in Quebec. So independent of the income that the caregiver has, he's going to get a cash payment, or she, of $11.85 if you're living together, or about half of that if you're living separately. This is new. The 533 is new this year. In the previous years, there was no refundable tax credit for people that were living outside of where the person was living. You had to live with them, basically, but now you don't. That'll probably go up. Any questions so far? Okay, remember that there's one there, okay? For anyone, if you have a private pension, what I mean is that it's not la Région du Québec, it's not the Quebec pension plan, it's not old age security. If you have a private pension, or if you have an RRSP or a RIF, you're allowed $2,000 of that amount to deduct from the income tax that you would pay, which is quite advantageous for you. An exception to this of the rule that the federal is normally higher on the non-refundable side than Quebec is the pension. You're allowed $2,805.
I'm going to just advise you that any questions regarding rebates, caregivers, please keep that for Andrew Dufour this afternoon. That's his specialty. We do have one here, Glen. Tax rebates from Province of Quebec for residents such as Ilo, here in Il Perro.
What is that a residence?
Yeah. It is.
Okay, is it a private residence? Yeah, so that applies. I'll cover that in maybe about 2 minutes. We'll look at it. It covers Annex J, which is the home support refundable credit that you get from the provincial government. Now, another thing that's really important as well, and sometimes people don't know, is that if the person is physically disabled or has major cognitive losses, you can ask your physician to sign a form so that you can get a very important, especially federally, a very important reduction in taxes. And that's called the severe impairment non-refundable tax credit. So I have a friend, I did his mother's income taxes, and she had been a school teacher, so her income was about $40,000. Well, she got about $3,000 every year when we applied the severe impairment. So don't overlook that. Your doctor can play a really important role in getting you the credits that you are eligible for. They might not like filling in the forms, but...
Does he have the form? Does the doctor?
He can have the form, but it's very easy to look up on the internet. I have my cards here as well. For anyone whose income is under $25,000, I'll be happy to do them free, there's no problem. And I can also answer other questions free of charge. So that pretty much covers the non-refundable, which is the minor part of what we're going to look at this morning. Let's go into the part of the presentation which deals with especially the provincial government is going to give you money. Isn't that a nice change from this morning? Wow, okay. The first thing that the Legault government did when they came into power is they introduced a $200 cash payment to all senior citizens over 70. Now, that is applicable to individuals that have between $22,000 and $26,000. After $26,000, then you lose the $200 credit. As an example, for people that don't have a private pension and they only depend on the public pensions, the $200 is a very significant help, especially if they can have the income tax done by us. We don't charge anything, as opposed to going to H&R Block where they'll charge you $100. So it's really quite advantageous. Now, medical expenses. There are medical expenses that are in the non-refundable category. I spoke about them a few moments ago. You can reduce your income by $2,300 approximately with your medical expenses. Anything over 3%. Because what they do is they take 3% of your income from your medical expenses and then they give you the non-refundable credit. Well, in Quebec, they have a program here which doesn't apply to the federal government, where they will give you $1,185 on your medical expenses. But there's a catch, which is really quite disadvantageous to us seniors. You have to have worked. You have to have worked or had employment income of $3,000 a year. So if you can get yourself a part-time job, get to $3,000 a year, and then you can get your $1,185 in cash rebate for your medical expenses, which is pharmacare, dental care, anything. But, you know, the provincial government is good at presenting a nice patina. We are generous, but they always have little clauses that really disappoint you when you discover the fine print in the law. Another element which is really important, how many of us have heard of individuals that need assistance to go upstairs and they have to have installed a mobile stair thing? That costs about $7,000 to $10,000. You can get about 20% of that back on that medical expense, and you can get about 20% back of anything that deals with material things that help you stay at home. So it can be a walker, it can be adaptation of a ramp, anything that you have to do in your home to allow you to stay in the home that is of a physical nature. Services are covered by home support services for seniors, the bottom part that you asked the question about. So you have to separate them out. The provincial government will give you money for physical adaptations on the one hand, which are under refundable, under equipment. And more generously, they'll also give you money for services. Now this is where residences come in. It's applicable if you're living in a residence. And you've probably heard about residences and they'll tell you, well, after what the government gives you, they'll quote you one price and then they'll quote you another one. This is what applies. And what it is about, if you're not living in a residence, I can't tell you what it is in the residence, but if you're not living in a residence, if you're living in your apartment, you can claim about 35% of all the expenses related to services that keep you at home. So an example would be if you have lawn care, if you have home delivery of your groceries, if you have somebody that comes in and cleans, you can get 35% of that back from the provincial government. So that's really quite advantageous. For the residents, on the other hand, what they do is they take the monthly rent, say it's $2,000 or $3,000, and they'll prorate certain amounts. So they'll take a certain portion for the basic rent, and then they'll take a certain portion if you receive services for house cleaning. They'll give you a certain portion for that, and they'll go along house cleaning, laundry, special care, depending on your level of lack of autonomy. So that's why when you apply to a private residence, they always tell you what the net price is. Has anyone gone to a private residence where they have not done that? Okay, that's good. It's a great selling feature of the private residences too, that it's sponsored. You can also have, in addition to the caregiver amount that you get as cash from the provincial government, you also get, the caregiver gets a small amount so that that caregiver can have some respite. And that amount is $15.60 per year. Remember, these are all maximums, and what they'll do is they'll start chipping away what the maximum will be depending on your income. So for the home support services for seniors, the maximum is quite high. If you are autonomous, in other words, if you can move around and you don't have a doctor that can certify that you're at a lack of autonomy, then the maximum number of expenses in money is $19,500 a year. So that's a lot of food delivery, it's a lot of Meals on Wheels, it's a lot of housekeeping, it's a lot of personal support. Often when elders are in transition from complete autonomy to assistance in autonomy, what helps a great deal is just to have somebody come in once a day, 2-3 hours. Well, the money that you invest in that once a day for 2 or 3 hours, up to a maximum of $19,000, you'll get 35% of that back. You'll get a third of it back. So that's really quite worthwhile. And that's only if your income is under $60,000. If it's, which most of us are, so if it's under $60,000, you get all of that back. And that's great because what it does is it allows you to stay in your home longer as opposed to being forced to leave your home, say if you don't have any family that come in and can prepare your meals or can come in and provide just 2 or 3 hours a day. Often 2-3 hours a day is all you need. It could be a morning routine or it could be an evening routine. That's all that it is. It could even be money that you can spend to have somebody come and just spend time with you. We know that elders that suffer from loneliness and isolation has a dramatic impact on their lifespan. Actually, loneliness now kills. We realize that it's very important. So one of the ways of preventing that is to make sure that you can have somebody around. Of course, there are community organizations that will do friendly visits. I'm involved in one downtown. It's called EBM, Entraide Bénévole Métro, where we have friendly visits. There's probably one in your local area as well. So just because it's not material doesn't mean that it doesn't impact on your life. Seniors activities. Well, the provincial government gives you $40. We used to have one for the federal government that was a non-refundable tax credit, a little bit similar to the, remember there used to be a non-refundable tax credit for your bus pass? Okay, well that disappeared 2 years ago, and I suspect that's what happened to the non-refundable one from the federal government. I looked everywhere and I couldn't find it. Any questions?
Yes, I have a couple of questions, Glenn, and our next presenter has arrived. Does caregiver tax credit apply to a spouse?
Definitely. It applies to a spouse. It applies to somebody that's living with you and now living with you, or if the caregiver is living with the person that's being taken care of. That's the third category. The first is the spouse. Second one, you're living with the person that receives the care, or the third one is that person that needs the care is living with you. And for this year, the first time, they give you half that credit if you're living apart.
This one I think is right up your alley. Who establishes if a person is an autonomous?
Doctor. Always the doctor.
And when would you be called in to do an assessment?
Oh, the assessments that I do are for people that are a lack of autonomy, where they need to have somebody answer questions for them. Generally, we're talking about dementia. So what my role is as a private social worker, and what the public social workers can do free for you in the CLSCs, I'm private, so I have to charge, but you can have it done free, is that the social worker will go in, get the medical report that the person is suffering from dementia or can't do their own decisions. Often it's because the bank recognizes it and they say, you need to have a mandate homologated. Then the social worker goes ahead and their report is to stipulate and describe what the consequences of not being able to make your own decisions is on the person's life and on the family and on assets. So it's a really nosy report.
And just not to have everybody fearful, there can be assessments done by a nurse at the CLSC to identify how much service you're entitled to, be it home care, be it light housekeeping, I guess, bathing, etc. So don't panic if you hear the word assessment.
Yeah, assessment just means a way of evaluating what needs are.
The next question is, will U-File, which is the computer program for federal government, I believe, or get both?
They do both.
Catch all tax credits?
Pretty much. Pretty much. Most of the programs will catch up as a function of your birth date and as a function of your income. So they should be able to corroborate both. If you're over 70, you are allowed to get the home support service as seniors. If you're 69, the program will pick it up that you're not eligible for that.
Okay, so it's not as good as, so it's not relying on how good the information is the person puts in. When you say home allowance, is that the same thing as shelter allowance?
No, a shelter allowance, if you want to look on page 2, turn your sheet over. A shelter allowance is provided by the provincial government if you have a very low income, under $17,000, and if your shelter is more than $300 a month.
So that means you have to be a renter? You
have to be a renter, and your income can't be higher than $17,000, and they'll give you a fixed amount. They won't gradiate it. They won't give it in steps. It's either $80 or nothing.
And it's for everybody who's over 70 who's renting and has...
No, that's anyone over 50. It used to be 55 and they went down to 50. Because there are a lot of people that are very, very poor and they are not, they have to spend money on rent. So you'll get a lot of people that are in rooming houses and they spend more than $300. Now that's important because you realize Montreal, like Toronto and Vancouver, rents are really going up a great deal. It's really difficult for somebody that receives only $17,000 a year. You know, if you haven't worked and you depend entirely on public pensions, the only pension that you'll get is the federal pension. And the maximum is on the second line of page 2. If you add 7 and 10,000, it comes to $17,000 a year. You try and live on $17,000 a year, unless you live in an H&M and social housing. If you don't, then you need to apply for the shelter allowance.
Are you finished with your presentation?
No, I want to describe how, you probably all know that the federal government provides an old age security, and for individuals that have income that need to be topped up, the supplement is $10,000. If you receive anything other than social security, the old age security, such as the Quebec pension plan, what they'll do is they'll take about half of what you receive from Quebec pension plan and they'll deduct it from that $10,000. Or it could be interest income from your RSPs, your RIF, any other income. The important thing about doing your taxes is that about 10 years ago, you had to apply every time to get the guaranteed income supplement. Now it's done automatically. But the problem is if you don't submit your form by the end of April, come July 1st, all you receive is the $7,000. You can get it back, but that's a big problem of delaying your income taxes. And if you do delay after April the 30th, we have to fill in another form. It's not just doing your taxes. If you're late, they're not going to catch up. You have to fill in an additional form that says that your income for the previous year say for Résidence Quebec or your interest income, was $2,000. Otherwise, it won't be done automatically.
I just want to be clear, Glenn, because I may have missed something the last couple of years. I tell all seniors to apply for the GIS, Guaranteed Income Supplement, even if you know you don't qualify, because you get a file open, and every year in July, we normally did get a letter asking if our circumstances had changed.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
No.
That has not been advertised.
Well, it's done automatically, that's why. But
Okay,
if you
once
don't
you've
do
got a
it,
file open, is automatic?
it's okay. Once you've applied
okay.
once, and if you file your income taxes every year by April 30th, no problem. They'll do the calculation. It's important for you to know ahead of time how much it'll be. So one thing that you might notice is that in 2017, the GIS went up by about $1,000.
Yes.
And that had a big impact on your 2018 GIS that you got. So you got more money coming in, but had an impact on your GIS the next year. It's quite amazing. They give it to you on the one hand.
The government to have it automatic, not make us go through this
Yeah.
every year.
That was quite arduous, and it really created a lot of suffering too before the government did that automatically. The other thing is when you're doing income taxes, if you don't have the slips and the T4s, who cares? Because the government have all this information. It's very simple.
We no longer need to keep it for 10 years. I can get rid of boxes in my closet.
Who cares in terms of getting the information to do your income tax returns? Do keep your forms, everything for 10 years religiously, because they can make a mistake very easily. You know that the CRA computers went down a few years ago. Revenue Quebec as well. The computers are not 100%, they're 99.1%. So there's still a good percentage that you have to keep your forms. And remember, if you forget to apply 1 year, you can always backtrack 10 years and get the credit that you're due. Okay? The sales tax. In the province of Quebec, we had the federal GST refund. When Mulroney introduced it in 1988, he said everyone's going to pay 5%. Went up to 7, then back to 5. And I'm going to reward people with a lovely $290 for all the GST that they have to pay throughout the year. That's the maximum. In Quebec, it used to be the PST refund. For about since 2010, what they've done is they've taken three parts of a refund amount that they need to give back to you. The first one is the provincial sales tax. So you'll see on the last page, the GST in Canada is $290. The PST equivalent is $292. But the Quebec Solidarity Tax Credit also includes an additional bonus for living alone, and then a third bonus, which is really important. If you're renting, the portion of your rent that goes to municipal taxes is refundable. So the maximum, if your income is quite low, is $83, and it's called the Solidarity Tax Credit. Any questions?
Speak up, and we've only got time for one.
Yeah.
It's only a point of interest that last year when I went to pay my Quebec taxes,
Yep.
I do it online, U-File, and I call it up online, and I didn't notice what it had said for 2019. So I paid it, and then a month later I got a bill in the demanding payment. And anyway, long story short, I called them up, and I should have changed that to 2018, but the automatic form showed up as 2019.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
So,
When did you do this?
well, last year when I did my income tax,
For 2018, you were trying to do your 2018?
I called up the form to pay for it to the bank.
Oh,
It said 2019, but it's 2019, okay, and I sent it off. So it automatically said 2019.
so you're talking about the payment forms.
It took me forever to get them to change it from 2019 to pay for 2018. And it was $143 interest and penalty.
You probably wasted hours on this stupid thing. So that's the advantage of going by computerization. Quebec is very good at computerization.
It's on the computer, I did it on U-File.
Yeah, well, it's fine when you do it automatically. But the problem is, if you do something that's a little bit off, it's like a spider's web. It takes a long time to get through it.
Why would I be paying 2019 tax?
Exactly, yeah, that doesn't make sense. Thank you, sir.
Okay, let's have a hand for Glen. Thank you very much, Glen.